So I'm glad to see you all attend this wonderful event. We're very grateful for Dr. Osumare for being here. Events such as Dr. Osumare's talk just highlights the importance of literature and the importance of a library, not as a place to house books, but as a place for community to come together and share in the importance of our history. So I was overhearing the doctor talk about how this book reveals a lot of Oakland history, and I kind of pricked my ears. So, in Oakland, I was saying how I'm from New York, and in New York, things happen to you, but in Oakland, you have the opportunity to create history and be part of history. And so I am blessed to be, with the history makers and to become one this day. This is my introduction to the good doctor, and I'll have Sandra McGee actually introduce her properly.
This is pretty exciting to have you here, Halifu Osumare. Okay, she's well known for the dance history that she has created here, not just here in Oakland, but she was in Europe and she was in Ghana. She's been all over the world. She's internationally acclaimed dancer and history maker of dance, and started the Everybody's. I think the first Everybody's was in Oakland. You went there? That's right.
Oh, you go all the way back there.
I'm sorry, what was it called?
It was called Everybody's Creative Arts Center. And that's where she started. And she actually hired me for a minute. I taught, I think, children's drama classes in there. And then she went over to the to Alice Street and started the. It was called Everybody's Creative Art.
And then City Center.
And then it became City Center, and now it's called the Malanga Center. But so she has this long history of acclaimed professional dancing, and we're honored to have her here to talk about this book that she has just published recently. And she's basically talking about, just coming of age and how she went through all the stages of her own dance career and brought it to the community. She didn't want to just dance herself. She wanted all of us to dance with her. And so it's an honor to have you here. And she just retired from teaching African American studies at UC Davis. So she's covered a lot of ground. And it's really an honor to have you here, Halifu. And I thank you very much for coming and for doing the work that you've done, because it wakes us all up to see how important African dance and how it has influenced us all and brought the community together. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm so honored to be here at Laney, because Laney as an institution is very important and figures into a lot of Oakland history and social activism here in the East Bay. Yes, a lot of my career was here in Oakland, Berkeley, and on the other side of the bay in San Francisco, because that's where I grew up. So all of that story, my career over 30 of my 45-year career, and I guess I'm kind of giving my age away there, but that's okay. I claim my eldership in this book that was just got into print last month, Dancing in Blackness, a Memoir. So I'm going to be just sharing a few excerpts from the book with you. I have a PowerPoint presentation that has some images and photographs that will kind of illuminate some of the words that I'll be reading from the book. And then we'll have a little conversation, a little dialogue, and we'll do a Q&A, and I'll allow you to ask me whatever questions you want. Now, in this book, since it is a memoir, I'm going to tell you it's basically my career. I don't dish the dirt too much in here. I don't, tell you everything about what I've done in my life, but I reveal some of my personal stuff. But it's mostly about my career and how that career actually influenced many different communities, as Sandra was saying. San Francisco, Oakland, New York, Ghana, West Africa, Europe, particularly Scandinavia, where I lived in Copenhagen and Stockholm for several years. So I will share a little bit this with you, and we'll kind of use the PowerPoint to go along this little journey. The publisher, which is University Press of Florida, put this little short overview about what the book is about. They say Dancing in Blackness is a professional female dancer's personal journey over 4 decades across 3 continents and 23 countries. I saw that and I couldn't, I said, did I really do 23 countries? I did quite a few, believe me. And through defining moments in the story of Black dance in America. In this memoir, Halifu Osumare reflects on what Blackness and dance have meant to her life and international career. So that's kind of like an overview. I will start with, on page 9, in the introduction, a kind of look at what I'm talking about as dance as a social political tool. Most of the times we look at it as dance as just steps. Well, it obviously means so much more to me. It's life. It's the way in which we express our collectivity. It is oftentimes the way we help move social change along through dance. And you'll see that the African dance community here in the East Bay in particular have definitely been about social change. They're the ones who took drumming and dancing in front of the Oakland City Hall and insisted that they begin to honor Malonga Casque Lord, who was the first Congolese dancer drummer to come to the Bay Area and started Fuadia Congo and has many generations of dancers now doing Congo dance here, that they named the Alice Art Center after he tragically passed in 2004. So that we would always remember his name. And now we have this Center for African-derived dance in Oakland named after Malonga Casque Lord. So that's just one example of how dance itself becomes a social political tool and not just a series of steps that people do on Saturday night. All right? And so I'll just start on that page 9 and just read a little bit from the introduction. Actually, I'm not going to start there. I'm going to tell you, I said a little bit about my personal life, so now I'm going to tell you, I'm going to start with who Halifu is, and then we'll go to that. I say in the very beginning, the first paragraph, Halifu in Swahili means the independent, rebellious one in the family. My mother tells me I was a headstrong child from the beginning, so when the playwright poet, Ntozake Shange, a friend I met in Oakland in 1973, gave me my African name as a gift, my destiny caught up with me. My new name revealed my life's path. Also, like my Caribbean cousins in Cuba, Haiti, and Brazil, who forged great religions from African belief systems and European Catholicism, I like making connections between things, bringing seemingly disparate elements together, and of course, doing it in my own independent way. I was born Janice Miller on November 27, 1946 in Galveston, Texas, an island in the Gulf of Mexico near Houston, where they say the Negroes were always uppity and too self-reliant. Galveston Black folks defied the white authorities by making their social and educational systems the best they could under the circumstances of legal segregation. Still today, after living in San Francisco Bay Area, the East Coast, the Midwest, as well as Europe, Africa, Hawaii, traveling to the Caribbean and Brazil, when I go back to Galveston, my people always say, "Oh, you're BOI, born on the island. You're one of us." My independent, rebellious nature as a Black woman born into a self-reliant Black community forged my approach to my dance career, which is the subject of this book. So that kind of gives you a little bit about my origins, yeah? You know, your origins never leave you, you just add on. Yeah, you just add on to where you started. And I say here about that introduction, that social political tool that dance can be. I have been at many of the key historic events of the Black dance debate through various initiatives, both proactive and reactive. These significant periods for me started in the 1960s San Francisco, Oakland Bay area, where I came of age and where I helped forge a West Coast Center for African-derived dance. This drive continued with studying dance in places like the University of Ghana, Legon's 1970s School of Music, Dance, and Drama, and being a part of the American Dance Festivals, the Black Tradition and American Modern Dance Project, to rectify modern dance's long neglect of Black dance artists' contributions. This drive in my career culminated in my own statewide Black Choreographers Moving Toward the 21st Century Dance Initiative that produced Black experimental choreographers from all over the nation and positioned them in dialogue with scholars and historians to engage their issues. Dancing in Blackness explores many of these historic moments and projects in which I was involved, and in the process tells the story of the Black struggle for recognition, justice, and self-empowerment through the prism of dance, a discipline only occasionally viewed politically. This is the way the chapter breakdown is, coming of age through Black dance in the San Francisco Bay Area, dancing in Europe, dancing in New York, dancing back into the San Francisco, Oakland Bay Area where I was for 3 years, and then had to make the pilgrimage to West Africa and spend a year in Ghana. And that is chronicled in the chapter Dancing in Africa, and then ending with Dancing in Oakland and beyond. It actually ends beginning of 1994. I had to stop there because it was just getting too long. I should have written this, 20 years ago when I didn't have as much to say. But I had to take 3 chapters out, so I have the beginning of a sequel already. This is a collage I put together of some of those events that I was talking about in terms of how my career developed. In the upper right-hand corner, that's me dancing in Oakland. I think right over there at what was the Kaiser Center when it was in operation, right across the street from Laney, with my colleague at that time, Leon Jackson. Here is me dancing with some folks in Tamale, West Africa, getting down with a young girl, showing her, even though I was a little older than her, that I could get down with her. And then this is me in Copenhagen, Denmark, with a Jewish woman that I met from New York, and we started a dance company in Copenhagen together. Let's see. Here is me standing in front of the Alice Art Center when we first moved in there, which was around 1985, after we had been 4 years at the Jenny Lynn Hall on 27th and Telegraph. We had 4 buildings, and this lady here remembers the first one on around 52nd and Broadway. And I do talk about that in the book. In that 6th chapter, what it was like. And I'm going to read a little bit from that before we finish. This is a flyer, the front of a flyer for our class schedule. You see, what is that, 1981? Over there, Everybody's Creative Arts Center. And remember the lady who was here brought me the flowers? Jackie Burgess, that's her right there. Right there as a young woman. I know, she's in the dance department now. So I've influenced a lot of the dancers who are now, passing on what they have learned to this current generation. And this is me in the 21st and Webster Street, the second everybody's Creative Arts Center with Dr. Linda Goodrich, who just retired from the dance department at Sacramento State University. We're going across the floor together in that building. So a lot of history. A lot of history. So in the first chapter, I talk about my beginnings at George Washington High School, and because that's where really I began to learn that dance could be a profession, and again, not something you just did as a social thing at parties, but as something that could actually be something that was a career. You have to get that concept about an art form like dance, because we oftentimes take it too much for granted. Very differently than music or fine art, painting, dance, because we all move, we all dance, is taken for granted as, and not really as a career. But in high school, I got that sense that it could be. I talk a little bit about my first professional job, and then about finding the Dunham technique with Ruth Beckford. So let me read a little bit about the George Washington High School experience. I entered the world of dance during a crucial period in the United States for Black people as a whole, the 1960s. When I graduated from high school in 1965, I had completed 3 years of modern dance. It was my good fortune to have a high school dance instructor, Mrs. Alice Rocky, who had convinced San Francisco's George Washington High School to offer a modern dance program within physical education. Mrs. Rocky had been a student of Hanya Holm, the German modern dance immigrant who had come to New York in 1931 to start the Mary Wigman School of Modern Dance in the United States, and who eventually choreographed several Broadway productions with this new expressive form that we began to call modern dance. Mrs. Rocky trained many young girls in the Hanya Holm style of modern dance that used floor work, torso contractions, natural swings, giving into gravity, and across-the-floor prances and leaps, much of which I would discover decades later was actually implicit in Africanist dance styles. So that's how I begin that. Now, on page 20, this is a kind of funny story about my first professional dance job in San Francisco. Now, I continued dancing when I graduated from high school and went to San Francisco State. My teacher there was Dolores Curtin, who then became Nansisi Caillou. And she was very important in continuing my modern dance training, as well as introducing me to this style called jazz dance, with R&B music and real jazz music, in class. So that was a kind of next step in my looking at dancing and Blackness. And so this is my connection to her led me to my first professional job. I got my first performing experience dancing an Afro jazz nightclub act with Zach Thompson, a Black California dancer who had returned to San Francisco from New York. Zach, originally from New Orleans, had taught and performed in the Bay Area in the 1950s, dancing in the civic-like opera and doing television choreography. He then left to perform in Europe and New York, only to return to San Francisco to, quote, show the Bay Area's colored children how to dance professionally. As he always quipped, to establish his name again and make a living, Zach wanted to choreograph a commercially viable Afro jazz revue with live drummers that could be booked into nightclubs, as well as for the concert stage. He asked Nansisi Caillou to recommend 2 female dancers from the San Francisco State dance program, and she advocated for my friend, drama student Judith Holton, and me. Zach taught us his combination of modern ballet, jazz, and Afro-type movements, choreographing a production that was commercially enough to entertain drinking patrons in the clubs, but had enough dance integrity for the concert stage. I was excited to put all my training to work for an audience, dancing with Zach Thompson because my first it was going to be my first paid performing job. He dressed Judith and me in African-style costumes, and our Afro Jazz Review became a regular act at the Half Note. Now, if you remember the Half Note on the Visadero in San Francisco, then you got to be a baby boomer like me. This was a majority black neighborhood bar on the Visadero and Grove Street. During the mid-1960s, after the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act, when black was beginning to be in, a superficial allusion to Africa was considered hip and cool. It took at least another decade for knowledgeable and researched African-derived performance to become the norm. Zach would go on to help found a multidisciplinary company in 1969 called Blacklight Explosion, and eventually in the early 1970s, his own Zach Thompson Dancers Incorporated. So that was, you got to have a first experience, right, to get you to feel like, you know, you could do this, and this is actually could be your career. So the next stage was Ruth Beckford, and she is still living today at 92 years old. She's not dancing, but she is dancing because she is still so lucid. And I sent her a copy of the book, and you know what she said? She says, "Okay, Halifu, this is what I want you to do." And she's on the phone. She says, "Now I want you to put your hand straight up in the air." I say, "Okay, I've done that. Now I want you to turn your hand, your wrist slightly to a right angle to your arm." "Okay, I did that." She says, "Now reach to the back, and I want you to pat yourself." Yes. I said, and I just laughed. She says, "You have done it. This book is awesome." You know, and to get that from your mentor, who's now 92 years old, wow. That is, you know, that was better than any New York Times review. Wow. Yeah. So, and that picture in the bottom right-hand corner is she and I just last year when she co-authored a new book, and came to Sacramento and to do a reading at a bookstore there, and I went and we took that picture together. So she's still dancing, you know, just like me. Okay, yet this was not the origin of the region's first experience of African-based dance. Oakland's Ruth Beckford, the first black graduate of the dance department at UC Berkeley, who had danced with the famous Katherine Dunham Dance Company, brought Dunham technique as Afro-Haitian dance to Oakland and San Francisco as early as the 1950s with her dance company. She also made Afro-Haitian dance and Dunham technique the basis of the first dance program in the Oakland Department of Parks and Recreation. This elegant, dark-skinned black woman with her thin waist blossoming out into full African hips and sporting one of the first short-cropped natural coiffures was considered the mother of black dance in the Bay Area. Her primary goal was to create productive, self-respecting young women through dance in social contexts, following one of Katherine Dunham's primary philosophical concepts, socialization through the arts. Here was a community dance teacher who had strict graduated levels of technique with dance exams that had to be passed in order to go from one level to the next. In the late 1960s, Ruth Beckford was the hub for the serious black dancer and those white dancers who felt the call of a different drummer. Miss Beckford, or Miss B as we called her, became a teacher mentor to Drs. Naima Gwen Lewis, Yvonne Daniel, Alberta Rose, as well as Nansisi Caillou, Deborah Vaughn, who is the artistic director of Dimensions Dance Theater here in Oakland, and myself, all of whom helped establish variations on the Dunham technique legacy in the Bay Area and across the country. The most revolutionary aspect of Miss B's classes for me was that drummers accompanied it, not a pianist playing Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart. The 6/8 and 4/4 rhythms of Afro-Haitian music were riveting, with the battery of drummers often led by Bay Area drummer Butch Haynes. These rhythms began to open an inner cultural ear that I didn't even know existed. After the dance bar warm up, we had center floor isolations, learning to separate the head and the shoulders and the rib cage and the hips from each other in order to play the drums polyrhythm in the body. Never before had I been expected to be so masterful with my center torso. Never before had this ever happened. Sure, I had learned to lock my spine in exact placement of ballet, contract it from the pelvis from Graham technique, and relax it from the waist with Limon technique swings. But to carry 2 or 3 rhythms in the torso at once was definitely a different cultural experience. So, moving on to what I talk about in the book, to this Bay Area, especially, both San Francisco and Oakland, cultural revolution, the culture of cultural revolution in this particular area, which is very different than other parts of the country. You should know that. Hello there, one of my drummers that I was just talking about. He used to play for Miss B sometimes, didn't you? All right, welcome.
Take some pictures of you, Daisy.
Sure, of course. Yeah. Now, what am I talking about when I'm saying this culture of revolution here in the Bay Area? We're talking about the beginning of the free speech movement at UC Berkeley. We're talking about the big San Francisco state strike that insisted on black studies and ethnic studies being as a part of the university, which changed the academy across this nation. We're talking about the Black Panthers who took their rifles, armed with their rifles, to the state capitol to insist on less police brutality way back then, okay? It's all come from this area, yeah? So that had to influence me. It had to influence the way in which I looked at dance itself, okay? So I say about that, armed with this new revolutionary cultural curiosity, I explored my own artistic approach through choreography at several venues, including the Sunday showcases at the Black Panthers headquarters, called the Oakland Learning Center on East 14th Street. Since the growing political militancy regarding black liberation that the Black Panther Party represented was not my personal approach, in 1967 and 68, I struggled with exactly how I could contribute to the movement. My answer was to take my solo choreography to the Black Panthers Sunday showcases and offer it as my creative contribution to the revolution. My dance solos were welcomed at the Panthers Sunday community gatherings, and this became my personal involvement in the Black Power political movement and the new revolutionary consciousness in the Bay Area. Dance has always been central to African American culture. Therefore, dance in service of social change, I thought, was a valid and effective means of communicating the shifting Black political consciousness. I don't remember the exact dance pieces that I performed, but they had to be an amalgam of what I was learning from Zach Thompson, Ed Mock, and Ruth Beckford, as well as my own developing choreographic voice from my San Francisco State dance classes. So, that is that part of the book. And this is some posters and photographs from that particular era. This is a review of a dance concert I put together in the Black Panther newspaper. Here is a concert that I actually choreographed, not just my own solo, but you see these various dancers. Elvia Marta, who is from Panama, a Panamanian dancer who moved here. Jamal Hamilton, Aisha Khalil, who still today is one of the main singers in Sweet Honey and the Rock, who got her dance training from me. And you see that this poster is, we took this concert to the Community Learning Center in East Oakland, which was the Panthers Center. So this was a concert that I actually brought there and produced there, and this is just how I looked back then. Thank you. This photograph was taken about, I think about 73, 74. Yeah, I'm hearing the call of the drum. All right, so moving on with this story, New York. Now, I'm going to pass over Europe for this presentation, but I was in Europe for almost 3 years. Again, starting a dance company in Copenhagen, Denmark, and then moving on to Stockholm, Sweden, where I taught in the largest school for dance called the Ballet Academy. And that really proved to me that I was now moving to a professional stage. So when I came back to the United States, and before coming back to the Bay Area, I went to Boston, where I lived for a year and taught dance there, and then eventually moved to New York, the Center for Professional Dance in the United States, and I joined the Rod Rogers Dance Company. So I wanted to just read for you just a very brief paragraph on what it was like moving to New York and just living in that city, especially in the Lower East Side where I got an apartment, and then what it was like dancing with Rod Rogers. So this is from chapter 3 called Dancing in New York. I landed right in the center of the reality of Manhattan in the Lower East Side, just south of Union Square, in Consuelo Atlas's apartment on the corner of 3rd Avenue and East 13th Street. It was a recently renovated building with the apartments containing newly laid hardwood floors and new appliances. But, and this is a big but, to get into the front door, I would often have to solicit help moving knotted out junkies out of the way. In May 1972, this was not the gentrified area of the Lower East Side it is today, with the chic cafes and antique dealers, flower shops, and the Classic Stage Company, one of the most prestigious contemporary off-Broadway theaters. Growing up in the so-called ghetto of the Lower Fillmore in San Francisco in no way prepared me for the reality of the poor, drug-ridden, downtrodden life of street people in my neighborhood of the Lower East Side. Yeah. That was it. So now I'm going to read for you about, just briefly, one little paragraph about dancing with the Rod Rogers Dance Company, and this is a slide about his company, which is still existing today. He died in 2004, but he had really institutionalized his company and studio, and someone else took it up, and the company is still performing today. In fact, when I go to New York, I'll be doing a book reading at their studio. Yeah. Okay. Rod Rogers Dance Studio, then at 12th Street and 5th Avenue, not too far from Washington Square Park, was my solace, where I found like spirits serving the dance gods. We all experience the joy of movement alone and together, striving to bring forth the aesthetic and social dance messages of our artistic director. The day I met Rod in his office to let him know I was there to take him up on his Boston offer, I had met him in Boston, took his dance classes, and he had then asked me if I wanted to come to New York, I would have a spot in his company. So I never even auditioned for him, except just taking his dance classes. So I was there to take him up on his Boston offer. He immediately welcomed me and let me know that he was glad to have me in his company, while having his secretary set me up on the company roster for the payroll. He immediately told me about the technical work I needed to improve, particularly my port-de-bras, arm gestures. As I was known for my special use of my hands that made angles like wings, rather than extending the length of the arm. I told him I was his canvas, and I wanted to improve technically and artistically to become a New York professional dancer as I set about learning the company repertoire. I want to just tell you about one piece that I danced in his company, and that was a piece to this, what at that time was a very well-known song in 1972, To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, first recorded by Nina Simone and then immediately covered by Donny Hathaway. And it was the Donny Hathaway version that we danced to. No. Don't have time for all of that. Gifted and black. Yeah, that's it. So I said, now, and so he choreographed a piece called Shout to the Donny Hathaway's version. And it was always usually done by a male before I joined the company. But he saw something in me, and I was the first female to dance that role. So I guess that's appropriate for Women's History Month today, huh? Okay, so I said, one performance at the Statue of Liberty Park, okay, and I got a slide of that, of me actually dancing that. One performance at the Statue of Liberty Park of Shout as a part of Rod's 1972 Summer Parks and Recreation contract was especially intense. When I performed a pitch attitude turn that ended with me staring right at the iconic Statue of Liberty. I seized the moment to focus my performance attention on this symbolic so-called symbol of liberty and freedom. That turning moment in the dance was filled with my attitude about the rights so often denied my people as the only unwilling immigrants brought and enslaved in the United States of America. Shout was the Rod Rogers Dance Company piece that allowed my unique qualities to be noticed and garnered me a mention in that New York Times review by Don McDonough. He, quote, Shout, an impressionistic portrait danced by Janice Miller, I hadn't become Halifu by then, was far from the enclosed world of box, which is another piece that Rod had choreographed about men imprisoned, black men imprisoned. And it moved easily and sensually around with a beautiful flow of movement, end quote. Though short and succinct, my part of the review was positive. I had come to New York to dance, and within 5 months, I had a favorable New York dance review, which was no small feat. So, I was 24. Yeah. So I'm going to skip over the dancing in Africa. So if you really want to know about me in Africa, which I spent a lot of time on in the book, you gotta buy the book. So that's me. That's a drummer in Ghana. This is I spent some time in the Fanti region, and this is some of their art and dance with some of these women, the Adzawa dance. And so now I'm just going to go back to, I want to end in Oakland since that's where we are. That's chapter 6, Dancing in Oakland and Beyond, 1977 to 1993, which is where the book ends. And this is some photographs from that period. And I'm just going to read a little bit about that section. And about my starting the institution that now is the energy. It's not the same institution, but the energy from that became the Malanga Cascade Lord Center today on Alice and 14th Street, which you can go and on any day take an African dance class or a hip hop dance class or a Cuban dance class or a Brazilian dance class. It is the center for black dance in Oakland. And we started it in 1977. I say, as I had always created and produced my own dance theater works, never seeking to fit into the existing larger white Bay Area concert dance scene, starting my own dance studio was actually an extension of my track record as a communalist-oriented artistic iconoclast. I saw myself as a cultural activist who was not the product of the elitist trained concert dance world. I had first emerged from the cultural activism of the West Coast Black Arts Movement with political sensibilities leaning towards the politics of the Third World Liberation Front that had formed around the San Francisco State Strike. Even though I had not stayed in the United States to participate during the heat of the strike, my politics developed from that sense of Black cultural power in solidarity with other communities of color. Therefore, my Everybody's Collective of Black, Chicano, and politically progressive whites was in alignment with the Bay Area tradition of reformist cross-cultural politics, as well as my own sense of individual rebellion. If one studies the historical development of California as a state in the Union, one finds pioneers, scoundrels, and bold self-made characters. And the initial Everybody's Collective viewed itself through the lens of the former, pioneering a kind of politics of recognition. And so that's how we saw Everybody's. This photograph here, again, had key folks who were going to go on and actually become a part of that whole cultural movement nationally and internationally. This is Ntozake Shange, who danced with me before she went to New York and became famous for colored girls who considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. We're still friends today. And she has written a book endorsement that's in the book for this. She said, at last, somebody who knows the magic of dance, Black dance, writing about it. And this is Aisha Khalil, who is now one of the main singers in Sweet Honey in the Rock. All right, and this is this other photograph is one of the first dance concerts that we gave at the first building on 51st and Broadway. This is Evelyn Thomas, who started the Nuba Dance Theater here in the Bay Area, and now they're in Atlanta. This is Raymond Johnson, a well-known Black male dancer in the Bay Area, and that's me taking a bow for a big concert that we did there. I wanted to say something just about the kind of spiritual energy that we created there as a part of the Black dance movement. Okay, I say dance in its purest context is a socializing and healing tool. And at its core, that's what Everybody's was all about. It attracted people who were looking for that kind of experience with other like spirits to form a community of caring and supportive people. And this quote is from one of our past students. She said, "The perfect metaphor was the circle at the end of the dance classes, when I was challenged to go into the center of the dance circle to improvise what I had learned. I was being pushed to be the fullest of who I was, while being encouraged by the other dancers and the drummers. When I was in the center, I understood we were carrying something from Africa. I remember you talking about me. I remember you talking about transformation for a common good, and we were inspired to pursue that together in the dance classes. Now I can see we were investing in each other, and what you gave lives on." Yeah. So, yeah, that's the energy of the dance circle, especially led by the drums. This is me teaching at Everybody's some Dunham technique. We started what we call the Multicultural Festival of Dance and Music, which, quiet as it kept, I feel was the forerunner to the Ethnic Dance Festival that happens in San Francisco. This was our finale show in the first one. This is City Center Dance Theater, our professional dance company that we started out of Everybody's Creative Arts Center. And the last thing I'll show you in terms of my career is after I left Everybody's in City Center Dance Theater, I started a major national dance initiative called Black Choreographers Moving Towards the 21st Century. That was the inaugural festival was in 1989, and it happened in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, and it continued annually after that. This is one of our panel discussions. I always felt that it wasn't enough to just dance, but we had to make sure that we educated people about what we were doing. And so we always had panel discussions, just like I wrote this book and discussed the social, cultural, and political context for what we were doing. And so I'm going to leave you with the last paragraph from the book that I think really sums up where I'm coming from. I say, today I realize that remembering ancestral messages is the process in which I have been engaged my entire career. Dancing in Blackness for my ancestors and for the future generations, for those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. My ancestors gave of themselves to make sure I could continue to dance in Blackness to save myself, and in the process to save others. One important Congolese adage that Malonga's Fuadia Congo Company uses is, Wadia Fua Yika Dio. What you inherit, you must add value to. I have come to understand through my mission that dance is life, and life is a dance, and I am the eternal dancer. Thank you. So that's just a little brief excerpts of what's in this book. If you want to buy one, we have one here today, and I also have postcards where it tells you the online link where you can go and buy it at another time. Questions, comments?
Black choreographers from the 21st century. What year did you start that?
It started in 1989, right. And then it continued yearly after that. And I always conceived it as a statewide project, but we brought dancers from all over the country who were black choreographers doing work that challenged our stereotypical attitude about what black dance is. I always wanted to do that, you know, like what you think is black dance could come out very differently from different black choreographers. We are not to be pigeonholed, you know, and stereotyped.
So this is the continuation.
Exactly. The Black Choreographers Festival Here and Now that just happened here this last weekend at Laney, again at Laney College Theater. See, you guys are a center for a lot of things going on that you need to make sure you take advantage of. But I was living in Hawaii when they started that, and they called me to get my blessings on that and to tell me about their ideas for continuing that project that I had started. And you know, so yes, they always say that their project grew out of mine. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And did you live in Europe before you moved to New York?
Yes, before.
So you were really young when you went to Europe.
When I left the United States, I was 21 years old. And my mother said, oh, you going to Europe? And I had a one-way ticket. I was bold. I don't know if you were here when I started off, but I said, you know, my Halifu means the independent, rebellious child in the family. And when I got that name, I said that I had found my destiny because it fit my entire personality. So, yeah, I was 21 when I left, and my father said, well, if that's what you got to do, go ahead and do it. And my mother was saying, oh, I just don't know. I don't want you to, you know, you're only 21. But over the years, she's realized that I was in control.
Is that when you went to Sweden? To Denmark?
I went to North Africa first, Morocco, then Spain, France, Holland, and then finally I ended up in Copenhagen and staying there for a year, and then went to Stockholm and lived there for a year.
And how were you received in those European countries?
Yeah, it's all in here. You know, I mean, I was, Europe treats, you know, you can find a sense of your individuality in Europe. You know, immediately just because they see a black face, you're not, you know, you're not just assumed to, from certain kinds of stereotypes. But they have their own stereotypes that exist. And so I found that it was ambivalent in Europe. I was both accepted as an individual, but those kinds of stereotypic attitudes about, especially what the black dancing female body is about, was still there. And I had to constantly overcome. And I talk about that in the book. I call it the Josephine Baker syndrome. Yeah, she was one of the first black women who made herself famous as the black dancing body before she was known as a singer even. And so I call it the Josephine Baker syndrome in Europe. But yes, I was able to discover a little bit more of my individuality than the United States. Race is not quite as etched in the society like it is here. Class is oftentimes much more of an issue there, but than it is here. But there's no other place like the United States in terms of being founded on racial stereotypes. Yes, Doran, kind of like my godson. Because this is Sandra's son, and I was around when he and his older brother were born, when we grew up in San Francisco together. We didn't tell you that. We go all the way back to childhood.
I met her, she was 9, and I was 8.
Yeah, well, you 1 year younger. So that's how far we go back. But anyway, Doran, what's your question?
I was wondering, through all your dancing, are there, related to political things, are there certain movements that represent different ideas that they're expressing?
Sure. I mean, what about that 1968 Olympics when they did this? Right. Just that. And when you do that, you don't have to say a word. It goes to a certain kind of, right. And now through the Black Panther movie, when you do this. But I think they knew a little bit about the Yoruba tradition, because in the Yoruba tradition, people who are initiated as priests, we do this. Let's do it. Let me show them. We do this, right shoulder, left shoulder, and then we hug. Yeah. So this, in the Yoruba tradition, means I'm in my center and I'm greeting you. Yeah, so there are lots of symbolic gestures and movements that are utilized in the larger context of dance that allude to political and social issues. Mm-hmm.
Hi, you
Hello.
said that, thank
You're quite welcome.
you said that Ntishaki Shang said, at last, someone who knows the magic of black dance. So I was wondering, how would you describe the magic of black dance?
I think I kind of described it a little bit as I was going along in my reading, but it has to do with, first of all, knowing that it's not just steps and movements. The magic of black dance is something that really accesses not only the body, but the spirit and the soul, which is connected to the ancestors, like I was reading at the past. In Africa, they always say, when I dance, my ancestors live. So it's that bringing forth of a kind of spiritual energy through the body that is larger than you as an individual, and connects to these rhythms that have been passed down for centuries, that actually are supposed to connect with certain nerve centers in the consciousness and in the body. If the drummer knows what he's doing, he can lead you all kinds of places. And so when in the African sense of dance, when the body, when the dance and the rhythms hook up, that creates a kind of magic that is even beyond that word, magic. It's about mind, body, spirit integration.
I want to ask you this because it kind of dovetails off what you said, but I used to take African drumming out at City College of San Francisco, and Kwaku Daddy taught that class, and I think still does. he used to say to the class, you know, don't worry so much about the rhythm. He said the rhythm will find you. And he was trying, because most of the class was Caucasian, and you know, folks were really approaching it very cerebrally. But I knew, you know, exactly what he was talking about. And so, you know, I wonder with dancers, with African American dancers, in particular, when it comes to choreography, I think there's that extra dimension, right, of the dance is going to be shaped by the rhythm kind of coming down, you know, from the ancestors, if you will. But how do you feel about it?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. Yeah, if you really tune into, you know, we'll just use, you know, that English term magic. If you really tune into the larger aspects of dance and music, you hook up those other spheres that is beyond just your normal consciousness. And that is what allows you to not only transcend your own body, but also to really communicate with people who are observing and your so-called audience, and to really touch them in a way that they wouldn't be touched if it was just a mental process.
And can I ask you a quickie?
Yes, and then I'll get to you. I know you have a question, yes.
Well, I did a work study at the Malanga Center before it was the Malanga, when Malanga was alive.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy. I spent a year selling dance tickets on Monday nights in the window, in the dance window.
And that is something that we started back then, that the way in which we were going to be able to function with taking in fees for the classes and all that is to train students who necessarily couldn't, you know, always pay for classes, but could do a work study program.
So I just wanted you to talk about Malanga for a minute and his contributions, because he was just like one of the most incredible human beings I ever met.
Yeah, he came here around 73, 74, and he had, for when he left the Congo, and he was a professional dancer in their national dance company in Congo Brazzaville. And then he went to Paris, you know, because it was a French colony. He spent some time in France, and then went to New York, and then, I don't know why, but ended up here in the Bay Area. And he was, you know, just magnetic. Right, you know, and he just had that. He just had the spirit. He always did. And then he had 4 or 5 children here, you know, who are now keeping the company going. But he taught a class at 12 o'clock. Now, he might not show up till 12:30 or 12:45, but the class started and somebody started some warm-ups with the drummers, you know, at 12. But that became an institution. He started at everybody's, and you know, he always came along with us whatever building we changed to, and those Saturday classes with Malanga was an institution. That's where you knew that you were going to be able to get the spirit of the drum and the dance, and he just had that kind of magnetic personality. He had this big smile, and when he danced, you know, his whole body smiled. So it was a big loss, but you see him and his children now, you know, Muisi Congo, Kiazi. These are all his children who are carrying on his tradition and who are still teaching that Saturday Congolese dance class and keeping the company For Dia Congo going, and it's known all over the nation. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, before you dance, do you do any kind of ancestral bringing together tradition?
Not necessarily before, but as I was explaining about the end of class, we oftentimes did the drum circle. And that's where people got a chance to improvise in the center of the circle what we had done throughout the hour-and-a-half class. And that was a kind of bringing forth of the ancestral spirit at the very end. So there's nothing that we do formally that's, from a particular tradition in the public dance classes, but the various mechanisms in order to link people to the drum and all that inherently has that as a part of it. Yeah. And, I mean, some dance teachers have become actual priests in traditions, and whatever they do is what they do personally, in advance. But you try not to mix the real tradition with the public, because you get every kinds of people coming in, including Christians who might not really want to partake in that necessarily, So, it's a dance class, but there's always elements of the ancestral spirit when the drums are there.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and could you repeat how you got your rebellion's name?
And Ntozake Shange, who is the author of For Colored Girls, that was performed on Broadway and many other plays, but that's her most famous one. We met in 1973 here in Oakland, and she was writing and doing poetry readings. I was one of her dance teachers, and I would oftentimes do dance improvisations to her poetry that became the For Colored Girls play. And so just one day she came, and I didn't go into detail about this, but I do talk about it in chapter 4, where she just came to my apartment as a friend. I had made some tea. We sat down on pillows on the floor like we would do back in the hippie days. And she gave me this white envelope with my name, and she had researched it, and she said, "This is a gift for you, and if you want to keep it, you can." And it like I said, I had found my destiny when I found that name. And all of my family members, except my mother, actually, call me that now. They never use my birth name anymore. Include my father. He just passed last November, but he always called me Halifu the moment I said that was my name.
So your mother calls you your birth name?
Mm-hmm. I birthed you, I named you that, and and that's who you are. And so now when I sign her cards, I will say Halifu, and then in parentheses, and Janice too. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Sandra, for inviting me.